Hello and welcome, friends. Especially those of you who value truth, courage, and the enduring strength of the American spirit. Today's story isn't just gripping, it's unforgettable. It's about a whistleblower, a hijacked train, and one woman's relentless mission to restore honor in a time of silence. If you've ever wondered whether integrity still has a place in public life, this journey will answer that, loud and clear. The Liberty Rail cut across the southern plains like a whisper at dusk, its magnetic pulse humming over iron tracks that had once carried soldiers home from war and families toward better lives. Inside the presidential car, Karoline Leavitt sat by the window, her fingers tracing the condensation on the glass as pine trees blurred into a golden smear. She was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the kind that came from fighting lies with truth long enough to forget what silence felt like. The train glided eastward from Austin, Texas, bound for Atlanta, Georgia, after her keynote address on national unity. It should have been a quiet ride. Her aide, Maya Chen, was resting 2 rows back. Young Caleb Monroe, barely out of college but already weathered by Washington's shadows, was typing quietly in the corner. Then came the ping. A secure, high-priority message illuminated her tablet. The sender, Judith Wells. Karoline's heart jolted. She hadn't heard that name in years. The message was brief, just a few lines encrypted through an old Cold War channel. Evidence verified, attempted seizure in progress, must meet before midnight. Location, Opelousas, Louisiana. Burned if delayed. Karoline's breath caught. Judith had been an archivist, a quiet warrior of truth during a darker era of media compliance. If she had surfaced now, at risk, then something catastrophic was buried deep. Karoline straightened in her seat. Outside, the sky dimmed into violet. She reached for the emergency override panel beside her seat, not as a politician, but as a woman who had sworn to protect a country from its own shadows. The journey had been meant to end in Atlanta, but Karoline Leavitt now knew the real destination was somewhere far more dangerous and far more necessary. Karoline didn't wait. She moved swiftly through the presidential car, her heels clicking in rhythm with the train's magnetic thrum as it crossed into Louisiana. Maya Chen stirred from her nap and followed without question. Caleb, sensing the shift in energy, quietly packed up his laptop. In the operations car, the air was cooler, industrial, sterile. Chief Rail Commander Raymond Cross stood behind a wall of screens, arms folded, posture rigid. He'd served under 3 administrations and had earned the nickname Iron Spine for a reason. Karoline didn't waste time. "We need to initiate an unscheduled stop in Opelousas. A High Valley national security asset is in danger. It's time sensitive. I'm invoking Directive 7. She expected pushback, but what came was different. Eerily calm. "Denied," Cross replied flatly, not even turning to face her. The word landed like a gavel. Maya stiffened. Karoline blinked. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice still measured. Cross turned slowly, meeting her gaze with something more than defiance. Detachment. "We're under strict orders to remain en route. You do not have authority to override Central Command." Karoline narrowed her eyes. "From whom?" she asked. Cross paused just long enough. "I'm not at liberty to say." That was all it took. The warning signs flared in her gut. She gestured for Maya to signal Agent Troy Decker, who was stationed 1 car back in Cybersecurity Command. Moments later, Troy appeared, already alert. "All lines are dead," he whispered. "Comms are jammed. We're blind." On screen, Caleb was already pulling data logs. The rail network's AI is no longer responding to White House credentials. It's locked in a silent override. Routing authority rerouted through a third-party satellite proxy. The implication was clear. Someone had hijacked Liberty Rail from the inside, and Cross was in on it. Karoline looked at Cross one more time, eyes steady, lips tight. "You're aiding a domestic conspiracy," she said quietly. Cross didn't flinch. "I'm following orders, ma'am." He turned away and resumed staring at the tracks ahead as if nothing was wrong. The train continued to race eastward, but now it felt more like a coffin than a corridor. Karoline stepped back, her heart pounding, not from fear but from betrayal. In her earpiece, Maya's voice cracked. "He's shutting down interior access to the control cars." Karoline pivoted sharply. "Lock down every friendly agent. Find a manual path forward. I want eyes on the conductor's car in 5 minutes." Troy looked at her gravely. "What if we can't stop this?" Karoline stared down the length of the train as the twilight deepened outside. "Then we don't stop, we break through." Below the floor of the Liberty Rail, in a world of steel and current, the battle for truth had just begun, and the first shot had been silence. The hum of the train faded into the background as Karoline stepped into the private observation lounge, a compartment rarely used, lined with walnut panels and quiet glass. She needed a moment, not to retreat, but to remember. The betrayal unfolding around her wasn't just tactical, it was personal, familiar. She gazed out into the Louisiana dusk, where flatlands stretched endlessly beneath a bruised sky, and her mind drifted back to a time when trust hadn't been such a rare currency. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her that public service wasn't about power, it was about duty. She could still hear his voice as a girl on their front porch in Manchester, New Hampshire, explaining why he saluted the flag even when the country failed him, because it still stands for what we could be. That memory, like so many others, had propelled her through journalism, policy work, and ultimately to the White House podium. But now, with the train hijacked and the truth in danger, she wondered if all those years in the arena had done anything more than sharpen her for this moment. Behind her, the soft shuffle of footsteps, Caleb Monroe entered, holding a small thermos of coffee he had somehow managed to find in the chaos. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I know I'm just an intern, but I've been watching you since I was in high school. My generation's cynical. We don't trust much, but we trust you." Karoline turned, caught off guard by the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't flattering her. He was pleading for a reason to believe. She accepted the coffee with a quiet nod and sat beside him. "Caleb," she said, her voice soft, "I've seen this before. People who smile on camera and sell out truth behind closed doors. The difference is, this time they underestimated how far I'm willing to go." Caleb leaned forward, hopeful. "What do we do now?" Karoline's eyes returned to the darkness beyond the glass, where the reflection of the train flickered like a ghost. "We remember who we are, and we give them a reason to believe again." Somewhere in the control car, enemies were guiding this train away from truth. But deep in the heart of the Liberty Rail, an old promise was reigniting, not of politics, but of principle. In the underbelly of the Liberty Rail, where no statesman had ever set foot, Karoline Leavitt knelt on cold steel. Gone were the polished stages and press cameras. Only rivets, wires, and darkness surrounded her now. Troy Decker had found the access hatch behind a maintenance panel near the presidential car, revealed by Caleb's quick thinking and a decades-old schematic buried in the rail database. The tunnel beneath the train's control cars was a narrow, claustrophobic artery, designed for technicians, not dignitaries. But Karoline didn't hesitate. She had rolled up her sleeves, tied back her hair, and dropped to her knees with a flashlight clipped to her lapel, and resolve etched into her face. Every shuffle forward scraped her knuckles. Her designer blazer snagged on a bolt, tearing it clean across the back. The scent of metal and grease filled her lungs, but she welcomed it. This was what truth demanded now, not decorum, but grit. Above her, Commander Cross was still broadcasting false coordinates, rerouting the train away from Opelousas. Troy kept her updated via a secure line. "They're trying to loop the train through an underground bypass outside Mobile. If they get control of the bridge, we'll miss Judith by hours." Karoline gritted her teeth. Not an option. She remembered what Judith had once told her during a quiet meeting after the White House Correspondents' Dinner years ago. Truth doesn't scream. It waits. But it doesn't wait forever. That memory pushed her forward. As she crawled, bolts rattling beneath her palms, Karoline passed a junction box that had been hastily rewired. Troy's voice cracked in her ear. "Sabotage. They didn't just hijack the route, they buried all our remote access. They want the train isolated." Karoline paused, catching her breath. Every part of her body ached, her knees bruised, her back strained. She could have ordered someone else to go, but that wasn't who she was. If she couldn't fight for the truth with her own hands, then she had no business defending it at all. Behind her, Maya and Caleb waited anxiously. Caleb clutched the satchel carrying emergency override drives. Maya kept one hand on her earpiece, the other wrapped tightly around a silver cross that had belonged to her grandmother. In that crawl space, faith and technology moved together. And above it all, unseen by them, the conspirators, monitoring Liberty Rail from Seattle, were watching every heartbeat on thermal scanners. But they had missed something crucial. They had predicted resistance. They had not predicted Karoline herself. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime in that mechanical coffin, Karoline reached the hatch beneath the control car. A thick panel of steel sealed the path upward. Troy's voice came again. 2 inches of aluminum composite. You can breach it with the override drill in the pouch. Karoline pulled it out, hands trembling but precise. As the drill whirred to life, she whispered under her breath, "This isn't just about a whistleblower. It's about a promise. To my father, to this country, to the people who still believe facts matter." The panel gave with a sharp snap. Light spilled down in a narrow shaft, slicing through the darkness like judgment. She hoisted herself up, scratched, exhausted, but burning with purpose. Above her, the control room. Ahead of her, Raymond Cross, oblivious, facing forward. As Karoline reached for the edge and pulled herself into the light, she wasn't just a press secretary anymore. She was a woman crawling through the system's spine to rip out its corruption. She rose slowly from the floor, backlit by the flickering panel lights, and said with calm fury, "You rerouted the train, Commander, but I reroute the nation." The moment Karoline Leavitt rose through the hatch and stepped into the control car, time seemed to freeze. The lights flickered against her dirt-smeared face, her torn blazer hanging loosely from her shoulders, and her eyes, sharp, unwavering, fixed on Raymond Cross. He turned, startled by the sound of her landing, his hand instinctively moving toward the emergency override key at his console. But she was faster. With one swift motion, she kicked the panel shut behind her, blocking the route to reinforcements. "Step away from the console," she commanded, her voice low but commanding. Cross hesitated. Just long enough for Troy Decker to breach the auxiliary door from the other side with 2 armed agents at his back. The standoff was over before it began. "You're under arrest for conspiracy against the United States government," Decker said flatly, cuffs clicking onto Cross's wrist. Cross scoffed. "You're chasing ghosts. This won't stop what's already in motion." But Karoline didn't respond with fury. She responded with silence, stepping forward and retrieving the manual override key from the console. It was warm, as if still clinging to his defiance. She held it for a beat, then turned to the master terminal. Her fingers, bruised but steady, moved across the interface with precision. "I need full rail control, localized to Liberty Command only," she said to Decker, who was already hacking into the sublayer of the train's satellite connection. "Authentication? White House Protocol, Delta 4. The screen blinked. A green light appeared. The route changed. Opelousas was back on the map. ETA 41 minutes. Karoline exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "Maya, Caleb, I want confirmation from Judith. Tell her we're on our way." Back in the rear car, Maya's voice shook with emotion as she relayed. "Confirmed. She's holding position. But there's movement outside the library. Someone else knows." That wasn't a surprise. Cross hadn't acted alone. As the train hurtled forward, now once again under loyal control, Karoline remained in the control room, staring at the shifting rail lines on the digital map, a dozen tracks branching across the southeast. "They tried to drown us in silence," she murmured to Decker, "but silence only makes the truth echo louder." He nodded. "They were betting you'd fold." She shook her head. "They were betting I'd stay behind a podium." A silent moment passed before the comms screen blinked again. An inbound encrypted message from NORAD. The signal was faint, then cleared. "Unidentified drone movement detected west of Opelousas. Potential coordinated interference." It was happening again. Down the train corridor, Agent Grant was already prepping the emergency countermeasure protocol. "Ma'am, if they try to intercept the rails physically, our only defense will be Santiago's drone wing," he said. Karoline turned to the side panel, tapping a code into the encrypted line. "Connect me to Lieutenant Carlos Santiago, now." Seconds later, a voice answered, young, composed. "This is Santiago, Air National Guard. We've been tracking shadow flight paths. Rogue asset inbound. I'm in the sky." Karoline's hand gripped the console. "Lieutenant, I need you to keep this train safe. We're delivering evidence that could restore everything they broke." Santiago didn't hesitate. "Copy that, ma'am. I'll get you there. Or I won't come back at all." The line went silent. Karoline stared out the narrow front window of the train, watching the tracks blur into twilight. Behind her, Cross sat silently in restraints, his composure cracked. "Why?" Karoline asked quietly. "Why betray your oath?" Cross didn't look up. "Because power always wins. You'll learn that soon enough." She knelt beside him, eye to eye. "Power isn't what wins. Memory does. And the people you tried to silence, we're going to make them unforgettable." At that, she stood and moved back to the command chair. The whistleblower was still waiting. The drone war had begun in the sky. The train was flying across rails like veins of steel through the heart of America, and Karoline Leavitt, once dismissed as just a press secretary, now sat at the helm of the Republic's most vital mission. The train surged forward with renewed force. Its destination wasn't just a town in Louisiana, it was the truth. And nothing, no drone, no corrupted commander, no corporate algorithm, was going to stop it now. Above the humid Louisiana skies, where storm clouds lingered like omens, Lieutenant Carlos Santiago locked eyes on the target. From the cockpit of his F-45 stealth drone, piloted remotely from a secure base outside Fort Polk, he tracked the rogue aircraft speeding toward Liberty Rail. The train, now just minutes from Opelousas, carried more than people. It carried proof, legacy, and the last chance for a broken country to look itself in the mirror. Inside the train, Karoline Leavitt stood at the forward window of the command car, eyes fixed on the horizon. A voice crackled through her comms. "Santiago. Unidentified jet is maneuvering aggressively. No comms, no transponder. They're armed. I'm moving in." Karoline responded calmly, "Lieutenant, this train is carrying America's second chance. We won't make it without you." He replied without hesitation, "Then you'll make it. My family didn't cross deserts so I could run from this." And with that, the line went quiet. In the air, the enemy jet sleep, unmarked and built for speed, deployed a targeted missile aimed directly at the magnetic bridge section of the rail ahead. It would derail the entire train and everything aboard. Santiago had seconds. He adjusted trajectory, rerouted power to forward shielding, and engaged intercept. The last thing he saw was the flash of sunrise breaking through the clouds. The explosion ripped through the sky like thunder. In the train below, the impact caused the windows to tremble and the lights to flicker, but they remained intact. Silence followed. Then a voice over the secure line. "Eagle 4 is down, pilot lost, target neutralized." Karoline didn't speak at first. She simply placed her hand against the glass, fingers trembling, as if trying to touch the sky. "What was his name?" she asked quietly. Agent Troy Decker checked the file. "Lieutenant Carlos Santiago, 28, son of Mexican immigrants, first in his family to serve." Maya Chen stifled a sob. Caleb sat frozen. Karoline closed her eyes, whispering, "Connect me to his mother." Now, moments later, a frail voice filled the cabin. "Mrs. Santiago," Karoline said gently, "your son saved all of us. He's a hero, not just to me but to this country. We'll make sure no one forgets his name." The mother wept, saying through tears, "He always believed in you. He said if you were leading, America had a chance again." Karoline's voice broke for the first time. "Because of him, we still do." In that moment, there was no press, no politics, no title. Just a woman standing in the wake of sacrifice and a mother mourning a son who gave his life for something larger than all of them. Outside, the sky cleared, and deep in the heart of a grieving train, honor surged through the rails like electricity. Unseen, but eternal. The Liberty Rail screeched into the makeshift stop outside Opelousas with a metallic cry that echoed across the bayou. There was no platform, no press, no crowd. Only a sliver of dirt and rail flanked by tall cypress trees and a single black SUV waiting in the mist. Karoline Leavitt descended first, flanked by Maya, Caleb, and 2 Secret Service agents, their boots crunching through damp gravel as they advanced toward the rendezvous point. In her hand, Karoline clutched a satellite phone, still warm from the last call with Lieutenant Santiago's mother. She didn't speak, but her silence spoke volumes. 10 miles away, in a dusty old church that had been converted into a local library, Judith Wells stood behind a stained glass window, peering out between the colors of saints and martyrs. She saw headlights through the trees, then shadows. She clutched the flash drive tight, hidden in the hollowed-out pages of a book titled Democracy in the Balance. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes remained fierce. Inside the library, dust danced through slanted sunlight as Judith turned to face a shelf of faded volumes, ghosts of a freer press. She whispered a short prayer. Outside, Karoline's SUV approached, headlights off. The agents fanned out quickly. Maya entered first, signaling clear. Then Karoline stepped into the dim sanctuary of the truth. There, in the quietest corner of the building, Judith stood waiting. Aged, tired, but unbroken. "You made it," Judith said, her voice raspy with equal parts relief and disbelief. "You're early." "We lost someone to get here," Karoline replied softly. "I'm not leaving empty-handed." Judith reached into the book and retrieved the flash drive, wrapped in an old cloth napkin embroidered with the initials of a now-defunct news bureau. "Everything's on here," she said. "Emails, wire transfers, contracts, proof of who's pulling the strings. They used media to smear you, but it was never about you. It was about controlling the people." Karoline accepted it with both hands, as one would a folded flag. "And they failed," she said quietly. "Because you didn't give up?" Suddenly, tires screeched outside. Maya rushed to the window. A black SUV, not theirs, had pulled up. 4 men in suits and tactical vests exited with haste, scanning the area. Karoline turned sharply to Judith. "Is there another exit?" "Rear stairwell through the children's section," Judith replied without pause. The team moved fast, but as they reached the back, one of the intruders kicked open the front door, shouting, "No one move!" Karoline's agents held them back just long enough for Karoline and Judith to escape through the rear. They burst out into a sunlit clearing, running toward the tree line where another SUV waited, an emergency extraction arranged by Troy. As they piled in, Maya turned to Judith, who was breathless and weeping silently. "You okay?" Judith nodded, gripping the flash drive. "I've waited 20 years for someone to believe me." Karoline, still catching her breath, turned and said, "Not just someone. A country. And they will." Back on the Liberty Rail, the remaining staff stood by the broadcast terminal, waiting for Karoline's return. The override systems had been prepared. Once she returned, the plan was simple. Upload everything, live stream to every network, and let the truth roar louder than the lies ever had. As the SUV tore back toward the train, Caleb looked down at the satchel beside him, the one he'd carried since the crawlspace. He pulled out a pen Maya had used earlier for a prayer and quietly placed it into Judith's hand. "This belongs with you," he said. "You didn't just keep the truth alive, you gave it a future." The weight of the flash drive was heavy, but Judith's shoulders were no longer bent. As the train came back into view, glinting in the Louisiana light, Karoline looked out the window beside her and said, almost to herself, "They tried to bury the truth, but they forgot it had roots." Back aboard Liberty Rail, the air was tense with anticipation. Technicians worked in silence, connecting encrypted uplinks and prepping the onboard studio for what would become the most watched transmission in modern American history. Karoline Leavitt stood in front of the narrow window, holding the flash drive in her hand as if it were a sacred artifact. It still bore the warmth of Judith Wells's palm, a symbol of decades of silence finally broken. Across the nation, millions waited. News had leaked that something was coming, something big enough to interrupt regular programming. In nursing homes, veterans tuned in diners, farmers leaned close to radios, in churches, candles were lit, and in living rooms, ordinary Americans, many disillusioned by years of corruption and division, gathered in quiet hope. When Karoline stepped before the camera, she didn't look like the polished White House press secretary the country knew. She looked worn, raw, and resolute. No teleprompter, no rehearsed lines. Just a woman who had crawled through metal and fire for a chance to speak plainly to her people. "My fellow Americans," she began, her voice calm but edged with emotion, "I speak to you not as a spokesperson but as a citizen, someone who has seen what you've suspected. The truth has not just been hidden, it has been weaponized, and those who profited from our division never expected this moment to come." She held up the flash drive. "What I hold in my hand is proof of media corruption, financial coercion, political manipulation, not from enemies abroad, but from within." She paused, her gaze steady. "But I did not get here alone. A librarian who once archived the truth never stopped believing it mattered. A soldier gave his life so this train could roll forward, and a generation, raised to question everything, chose, instead, to listen." Behind the camera, Caleb, Maya, and Troy stood in silence. The technician nodded. "Live across all platforms," Karoline's words poured into the hearts of millions. "Let this not be the end of cynicism," she said, "but the beginning of conscience. We don't need perfect leaders, we need brave ones. We don't need uniformity, we need..." As her voice trembled slightly, she closed with the words her father once told her under a flag at half-mast. "We salute what we hope to become, not just what we've been." The broadcast ended. Silence reigned. Then, across the country, something shifted, not in headlines, but in heartbeats. The truth, after years in exile, had found its way home. The sun was rising over Washington, D.C. as Liberty Rail quietly rolled into its final stop. There were no red carpets or news cameras waiting, just a line of honor guards, veterans, and school children holding handmade signs that read, "Truth Matters Again," and "Thank You, Judith." Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the platform not as a press secretary, but as a woman who had carried the weight of a nation's silence and cracked it open for light to pour through. In her coat pocket was the now famous flash drive, its contents already being dissected by congressional panels and public investigators. But the greater legacy wasn't in the files. It was in the faces of those who now believed again. Later that afternoon, in the rotunda of the Library of Congress, a small private ceremony was held. Karoline placed the drive into a glass case next to the Constitution's parchment, unlabeled, unadorned. A simple plaque beneath it read, "Judith Wells, Archivist, Truthkeeper." In Louisiana, a bench was unveiled outside the Opelousas Library, where Judith had once stood watch in silence. Maya, Caleb, and Agent Troy were there, joined by locals who had no idea their sleepy parish had helped change the course of a country. Back in D.C., Caleb stood before a podium on the steps of the Jefferson Memorial, reading aloud a letter from Lieutenant Carlos Santiago's mother. "My son didn't die for politics," she had written. "He died for decency, for conscience, for the hope that we are still worth fighting for." Tears filled the eyes of those who listened. Older Americans especially, because they recognized something they had feared was lost. Sacrifice not for self, but for others. As evening fell, Karoline returned to her office, now adorned not with accolades but with handwritten letters from citizens, truck drivers, school teachers, grandmothers. She lit a candle beneath a folded flag and whispered, "We didn't just save the truth, we remembered who we are." In that moment, the story of Liberty Rail was no longer just about conspiracy or exposure. It had become a restoration of faith in a republic that had almost forgotten how to believe. The story of Liberty Rail is not just a political thriller. It's a reminder of what America can be when ordinary people choose courage over comfort. Through Karoline Leavitt's unwavering resolve, we see that truth is not passive, it must be pursued, protected, and sometimes fought for in the darkest, most unlikely places. From a whistleblower hiding in a forgotten library to a young pilot sacrificing his life to protect a train, every act of bravery in this story reminds us that democracy isn't upheld by institutions alone, it's sustained by conscience. For older Americans who have watched decades of change, mistrust, and division, this story offers a powerful reassurance. It is not too late to remember who we are. It's a call to rekindle faith, not in perfection, but in principle. The truth was nearly buried, but those who remembered its value refused to let it die. The lesson is clear. Lies may be loud, but truth endures when carried by those willing to suffer for it. In a time of noise, this story gives us back our silence, where we can hear our conscience again, and in that stillness, we find the strength to rise.